Today we're looking into a really fascinating text, Leviticus chapter 14. We're going to plunge into its world of ancient ritual cleansing. And not just for people with what it calls defiling skin diseases, but, and this is the really insightful part, I think, also for defiling molds in houses.
It treats both with such a similar level of ritual detail. It's quite remarkable.
The prescription is just extraordinary. You really get a unique window into these practices.
It's not just vague ideas, it's like a step-by-step manual almost.
Right. So our mission today is to unpack those exact steps, the specific materials required, and these surprising parallels that the source draws.
To really get a feel for what this text is telling us about ritual purity, about restoration in that ancient context.
Understanding these specifics really opens a window, doesn't it? Into their concerns, their priorities, the whole worldview.
Absolutely. So, should we start with the person? Someone with a defiling skin disease, but after they seem to be healed.
Okay, yeah. Where does it begin?
Well, the source is really clear. The priest has to go outside the camp first to examine them there.
Outside the camp, that immediately tells you something, doesn't it? Separation.
Definitely. That examination is key. It's like, you're still separate, but maybe, just maybe, you can come back. If the priest checks and confirms, yep, healing has happened.
Then the ritual process can kick off.
Right. And it gets specific straight away about the materials needed.
It lists things like 2 live clean birds.
And cedarwood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop.
Quite a collection. It feels very symbolic just from the list.
It does. And the source describes what to do, particularly with the birds. One is killed over fresh water, running water in a clay pot.
Okay, so you've got this mixture, blood and fresh water, in a pot. What about the other bird, the live one, and the other items?
They take the live bird, the cedar, the yarn, the hyssop, dip it all into that blood and water mix.
Right, so this whole bundle essentially coated in the mix. What do they do with that?
They use that to sprinkle the person being cleansed.
Sprinkle them. How many times?
7 times.
So after the 7 sprinkles...
The priest pronounces them clean. Ritually clean, at least at this stage.
And the live bird, the one that was dipped in the blood?
That one gets released. He says it's let go in the open fields.
Huh. Flies away, like it's carrying something off.
That seems to be the idea, symbolically carrying away the impurity, perhaps.
Okay, but that's just step 1. Outside the camp. They can come into the camp after that. But there's more, right?
Oh yeah, much more. Right after this, they have to wash their clothes, shave off all their hair, everything. Head, beard, eyebrows, all body hair. Then bathe. The text says they're ceremonially clean then, but they still can't go into their own tent. Not yet.
Really? So they're in the camp, but still sort of separate?
Exactly. For 7 days, they have to stay outside their tent, like a transition period.
7 days. And then what happens on the 7th day?
More shaving. It's incredibly specific again. Shave off all the hair a second time.
Wow. Okay. Head, beard, eyebrows, the works. Again?
Again?
Yeah.
Wash clothes again, bathe again. Then it says they are truly clean.
Right. Now, this next bit, the 8th day, this involves a lot of offerings and some really detailed actions, especially for those who, could afford it according to the source.
Yes, the 8th day is the big culmination, focusing on atonement. They bring quite a list to the priest at the tent of meeting entrance.
What's on the list for the sort of standard offering?
2 male lambs, 1 ewe lamb, all without defect. Plus, fine flour mixed with oil, a grain offering, and a specific amount of oil, a log of oil.
That sounds like quite a significant offering. And it's about atonement, making things right.
That seems to be the core purpose described here. Completing the reconciliation, the cleansing, allowing full reintegration. One of the male lambs is designated as a guilt offering.
A guilt offering. What's the specific role of that here?
Well, given its role in the ritual, it seems tied to dealing with aspects of, let's say, ritual liability or making amends within the system. The text says it's waved before the Lord, that specific wave offering motion.
Okay. And then it's sacrificed.
Yes, slaughtered in the sanctuary area. And here comes a really unique part. Applying the blood and then applying the oil.
The description is so precise.
It really is. The priest takes some of that guilt offering blood and puts it on 3 specific spots on the person. The lobe of their right ear.
Right ear, okay.
The thumb of their right hand.
Yeah.
And the big toe of their right foot.
Always the right side. Ear, thumb, toe. Very specific points.
Very. And then the oil part follows, just as precisely. The priest pours some of the log of oil into his own left palm.
Okay.
Dips his right finger in that oil and sprinkles some of it before the Lord. How many times do you think?
Let me guess. 7.
7 times, exactly. That number, again, often linked to completeness or divine action in the text.
So after sprinkling some oil before the Lord,
He takes the oil still in his palm and puts it on the exact same places he just put the blood.
on the right earlobe, right thumb, right big toe.
Yep. And the source is explicit.
Yeah.
He puts the oil on top of the blood.
Blood first, then oil directly on top. That layering feels significant.
It does, doesn't it? And whatever oil is left in his palm, he puts on the person's head to make atonement for them.
Wow. And is that it, or are there more sacrifices?
There are. After that blood and oil application, there's still a sin offering and a burnt offering, plus the grain offering. These seem to complete the whole atonement process, finalizing the cleansing.
It's incredibly thorough. But what's also really important, I think, is that the source provides options, right, for people who couldn't afford all those lambs.
Absolutely. That adaptability is built into the rules described here. If someone is poor and can't afford the 3 lambs,
What do they bring instead?
the list changes. They still need the 1 male lamb for the guilt offering that seems essential, and the flour and oil, and the log of oil. But instead of the other 2 lambs,
Yes.
they can bring 2 doves or 2 young pigeons. The text says, such as they can afford. 1 bird is for the sin offering, the other for the burnt offering.
So the core ritual, that blood and oil on the ear, thumb, toe, does that still happen for them?
Yes. That part, using the guilt offering lamb's blood and the oil, seems absolutely central. It happens for everyone being cleansed this way.
But the later sin and burnt offerings use the less expensive birds instead of lambs.
Exactly, making the full atonement process accessible, according to the text provisions. And it wraps up by saying these rules cover all sorts of defiling skin diseases, sores, swellings, rashes, shiny spots.
Okay, so that's the process for people. Incredibly detailed. But then the chapter pivots, doesn't it, to houses, cleansing houses from defiling molds.
Yeah, it's quite the shift in subject, but not so much in the ritual logic, as we'll see. And it specifically says this applies when they enter the land of Canaan.
Ah, so it's anticipating settled life, moving from tents to permanent houses.
Seems so. The process begins when a homeowner sees something that looks like this defiling mold, and they report it to the priest.
Okay, makes sense. Call the expert.
But here's a fascinating practical detail. Before the priest even goes in to look,
What?
he orders the house to be empty.
Empty? Why?
The source actually explains, so that everything inside doesn't get declared unclean unnecessarily if the house is found to have the mold.
Huh. That's surprisingly pragmatic, embedded right there in the ritual instructions. Okay, so house empty, then the priest goes in. What's he looking for?
He examines the walls, looking for greenish or reddish patches, specifically depressions that seem to go deeper than the wall surface.
Deeper than the surface. Okay, if he sees that.
Then, the instruction is clear. He goes out, shuts the door, and orders the house closed up for 7 days.
Another 7-day period. Isolation again, but for a building this time.
Exactly. Then on the 7th day, he comes back for inspection number 2.
And if the mold has spread.
If it's spread on the walls, then the source requires some pretty drastic actions.
Like what?
They have to tear out the contaminated stones, rip them right out of the wall,
Wow. And what do they do with them?
throw them away in an unclean place outside the town. The text is specific about that disposal location.
An unclean place outside town. That concept again. Okay, stones out. What else?
All the inside walls have to be scraped down thoroughly, and all that scraped off plaster and dust, same place, dumped in the unclean place outside town.
Keeping the contamination contained and removed. Makes sense in a way. Then they repair it.
Yes, with new stones and fresh plaster. Patch it all up.
But is that always enough? What if the mold comes back?
Well, the text anticipates that. It describes a test for what it calls a persistent defiling mold. If, after all that work, tearing out stones, scraping, replastering the mold reappears and spreads again,
Then what?
then the house is declared to have a persistent mold. It's pronounced unclean, fundamentally unclean.
And the consequence for that?
It's final, according to the source. The house has to be torn down, completely
Like
demolished.
the whole house. Stones, timbers, plaster, everything.
Everything. And all the rubble taken out of town to that same unclean place.
That seems incredibly severe. Tearing down someone's home?
It does. It shows how seriously this source views this kind of persistent contamination in a dwelling space. It's presented as the only solution.
And there are even rules for people interacting with the house while it's just closed up, right? During that first 7 days?
Yes. Anyone who goes inside is unclean until evening, and it has to wash their clothes. Same for anyone who sleeps or even eats in there, wash your clothes. It really emphasizes the contagious nature of this ritual uncleanness.
Okay, but what if the mold doesn't spread after the replastering? What if the repairs worked?
Good outcome. If the priest comes back, inspects, and sees the mold hasn't spread, he pronounces the house clean. The problem's dealt with.
But is that the end of it? Or is there a ritual for the house too?
There is. And this is where those parallels become really striking. Even a house declared clean needs a purification ritual.
And what does that involve? Let me guess. Birds.
You got it. The source requires the exact same materials listed for the person's initial cleansing. 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop.
Wow. The exact same list. That's fascinating.
Isn't it? And the procedures are remarkably similar too. 1 bird killed over fresh water in a clay pot.
Just like for the person?
Mm-hmm. Then the cedar wood, hyssop, scarlet yarn, and the live bird are dipped into the blood and water mix.
And they sprinkle the house with this bundle 7 times.
7 times.
Yeah.
It says they purify the house using the blood, the water, the live bird, the wood, the hyssop, the yarn.
And the live bird, what happens to it after sprinkling the house?
Same as before. Released into the open fields outside the town.
So the ritual for cleansing a house mirrors the initial ritual for cleansing a person in so many ways.
It does. And the text says this ritual makes atonement for the house, and then it's clean.
The source finishes by saying, these regulations cover all these things, skin issues, molds in fabrics or houses, and basically teach how to distinguish clean from unclean in this system.
Yeah. What's so amazing is seeing how the source connects these things that seem really different to us, like a skin condition and mold on a wall, under this very similar, very intricate ritual framework.
Defilement, separation, cleansing. The pattern applies to both people and places.
It really highlights how purity and impurity in this view weren't just personal. They extended to the spaces people lived in. And when you pull back and look at the key elements...
The patterns are undeniable, aren't they?
Absolutely. First, the priest's role is totally central. Examination, pronouncement, doing the rituals, it all goes through the priest.
And those specific materials show up again and again. The birds, the cedar, the scarlet yarn, the hyssop, they're like the standard kit for the first stage of cleansing.
Mm-hmm. And that core set of actions, using blood and water, the 7-fold sprinkling with that specific bundle.
Including the live bird?
Right. And then releasing that live bird out into the fields. These actions repeat. They're clearly symbolic steps described in both scenarios.
Plus the periods of separation. 7 days outside the tent for the person. 7 days the house is shut. Isolation is part of the process.
And that idea of the unclean place outside town, a designated spot for getting rid of the contaminated stuff, especially from the houses, keeping it separate.
And ultimately, both people and houses, according to the source, need these complex atonement rituals. It shows how seriously these types of defilement were viewed to get back to a state of cleanliness and be fully part of the community again.
Whether it's a person or a property.
So we've really gone deep into these incredibly detailed, multi-stage processes from Leviticus 14, addressing what it defines as defiling skin diseases and defiling house molds.
Yeah, the level of detail is something else. The precision, the specific items, the repeated numbers, the whole structure of separation, and then ritual restoration.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About all the layers of meaning potentially packed into each step.
Definitely.
Like, here's something to mull over. What about that released bird? It shows up in both rituals. What might letting it fly free really represent after all that intricate purification and sacrifice?
That's a great question. Or flip it around. Why treat house mold with a purification ritual that's so incredibly similar to the one for a person's disease? The source puts them on such a parallel track, suggesting both are states needing similar complex ritual fixes to be made right again.